You're listening to Beyond the Bell, Leading with Purpose, a new conversation space where educators and leaders explore what it truly means to lead with purpose, courage, and heart. Join Dr. Nathan Manley and myself, Jim Cummins, as we share the inspiration behind Lifted and how purpose-driven leadership can transform schools and communities. This is Beyond the Bell, Leading with Purpose.
When Jim and I founded Lifted, our goal was to support leaders through sustained coaching, systems thinking, and practical development. Beyond the Bell flows from that same heart, creating space for leaders to reflect, learn, and be encouraged as they lead with purpose. One thing we've both learned is that leadership is too heavy to carry alone. The best leaders I know have people around them who sharpen their thinking. Wise counsel, as we would say. Tell them the truth, help them process hard decisions, and remind them who they are when the work gets difficult. Sometimes that comes through mentors, sometimes it comes through trusted peers, advisors, coaches, or a strong leadership team. That's part of what we want to explore today with Dr. Schmitz, what it looks like to stay grounded, supported, and purposeful over time. Today we're honored to welcome back Dr. Dave Schmitz, Superintendent of Lebanon R3 School and Missouri's 2025 Superintendent of the Year. Dave was one of our earlier guests, and that conversation focused heavily on real-world learning, community partnerships, and the idea that results should come by design, not by default. And by the way, Dave, as I have been out there talking to people, I have stolen that 100%. I try to give you credit every time, but I love it. I'd encourage you to go back to it because Dave gives a practical look at how districts can build systems that expand opportunity for students instead of leaving it to chance. Today, we want to build on that conversation, but from a slightly different angle. We want to talk about what sustains leaders over time: relationships, reflection, purpose, and the people who help sharpen us along the way. Dave, welcome back to the show. And before we jump into leadership topics, how have you been?
Been really good. I've been very good. I am extremely blessed and thankful to just as you just really in the promo, I get to work with an amazing team of leaders and staff, and so it's a good place. Good thing to be in Lebanon.
Very good.
Let's talk a little bit about you've led at multiple levels now. What have you learned about sustaining leaders over the long haul? Maybe that's what builds them up, what makes them want to stay part of your team. But how do you sustain those leaders?
Mm-hmm. I think just like with kids or anybody, any human being, I think understanding where their strengths lie, where their passions are. I think we all function at a much higher level when we get to work both in our strength and in our passion, and so helping them really be in the right place. You know, sometimes we talk about getting the right people on the bus, but we got to get them in the right seat on the bus. And again, it's just all about intentionality and leveraging people to be in a place where they're going to be most successful. I think, and this is really through my own personal experience, because I think we've all lived in situations where we've had great leadership and we've served under maybe leadership that wasn't so great. And I've often learned more about leadership through that latter experience. And so to be empowered to really have the opportunity to have impact and influence, that fills my cup. And when I don't have the opportunity to have the steering wheel or have the opportunity to influence and impact or maybe put my fingerprints on things, I am not as fulfilled. And I really think that is one critical way through empowerment that I've seen people flourish and seen people feel lifted up and fulfilled is when they get to be put in a spot where they really do have ownership and empowerment. And so it's been pretty critical to me and certainly is key to how we've structured my teams here.
I'm going to follow up a little bit on that because I agree 100%. And I think sometimes leaders are a little bit leery about hiring somebody that's not like them or doesn't think like them. And I've always challenged to that's should be your opposite thinking. You should be going out and getting those people that are different. But how does that leader find comfort when they have somebody that Well, for instance, I'll just use Nathan and I's relationship. Nathan thinks a little different than I do. And so sometimes it was turn him loose, but then come back and we would chat and maybe get back on the rails or whatever. And then others, I had another assistant superintendent who was outstanding at his job, and he was one that could address an issue very directly and get things done in a different manner. And so just talk about how the leader has to have a comfort in knowing that if you're going to surround yourself with different types of personality, different types of thinking, different types of leader, how you have to be comfortable with that.
Absolutely. And I think it's very true. I think as a young leader, um, or a veteran leader, I think it really is rooted in your personal security. If as a leader, if you're not confident in your where you are, that I am the superintendent. I don't have to do things. I don't have to elbow myself into that seat. I'm there. And so when we are comfortable and confident where we are, and we're not worried about that, then I think you're more open to be vulnerable to the reality that none of us are as good as all of us. And when I can acknowledge that I don't have certain strengths, but when people do, they make me better, and together we're gonna be able to accomplish what we need to do and at a different level. So I think it really is about confidence. I think we all struggle. I certainly did. I was a micromanager. I'll be honest with you. The thing I hate most in the people that I've worked with over the years from a leadership standpoint is when they've micromanaged me, and I realized that it's my tendency because I want to control things. And as a young leader, I did. As a young leader, I struggled to not try to have my hands on all the keys. And the reality is, oh my goodness, I just learned the lesson, like we talked about at the beginning. When we empower people, when we enable them, and when we put the right people in the spots, gosh, a job well done different than me is better than a job that I'm trying to do that isn't done yet. And so it's just really understanding distributive leadership and realizing that it's okay if it's different. It's key that as long as we have a core focus on the vision or the end state that we're trying to get to. I've learned over the years that it's just okay if it doesn't look like the way I wanted it to originally, but it doesn't have to be my way. And I do think it comes through maturity. And if I were to talk to myself, my young self 25 years ago, I'd say, hey, just it's okay. I mean, it's okay to not have to work those insatiable hours and to not have to do it all, but to just equip and empower other people to shine and then celebrate them when they do.
One of the things I think I hear you say when you talk about that is, was there a time or a moment or an evolution for you that you started to value the process more than the final product?
Oh, absolutely. And it's been a learning journey. If any of you, I would encourage anyone who has not read Carol Dweck's book, Mindset, or
Hmm.
Angela Duckworth's book, Grit. I mean, they all speak to, if we are only outcomes oriented, if our worth and value of whatever we're doing is the product of the end result only, then we're going to miss the mark most of the time. But it really is about how we handle the journey, how we handle, and it's the right habits, and it's the right behaviors. So yeah, it's been very much a learning journey, and I would say that studying those books and just about mindset have been critical. And there's a book that we've been really engaged in. It's an older book, but most of you probably have read it. Is and I was late to the game, I think, is Atomic Habits, and James Clear.
Yeah.
Um, James Clear is it really just lays it out in the reality that it rarely is just the end game focus. It's really about an accumulative addition of small, tiny little engagements And it's so applicable in the classroom to students' reading capacity, math, to weight loss, to just any other life discipline. And so, yeah, I have learned to be so much more of a process, right behaviors, right actions lead to great results in my mindset. And that's been a journey. I'll tell you another book, if, since we're throwing out books, if from a faith standpoint, Craig Groeschel, I think he studied James Clear book, The Atomic Habits, and he wrote The Power to Change. And it's very much the James Clear book, but it's through a faith perspective. So cool. It's a great book. So there you go. There's a few out there to add to the reading list if people haven't read them.
Uh,
Yeah.
I think I would say those first three you mentioned, grit, mindset, atomic habits, would probably be in our top 10 list. Things that we talked about often when we were doing PD and stuff with our leaders. But it reminds me that we might want to start like a book list for that we tag to our
Yeah.
site or something, because we often have leaders on here that mention books, and just be a great resource for leaders. Um,
Well, I
but
think
yeah,
it's pieces there every time we have these leaders on, and it's clear that they've reached the top in some form or fashion, and they're still learning. They're still because we talk about it, leadership is a craft, and it's something we can develop just like you would develop maybe your putting game, or I'm not a great golfer, so
Well, well, Nathan, it's a process, right? We just talked
yeah.
about the
Oh, there you
process,
go.
and so I mean, I'm looking at my bookshelf over there, and I mean, it's just like we fill our cup with tiny drops of nuggets of life experience, and whether it's through the experiences we have, or I'm a big fan of the Heath brothers and Chip and Dan Heath. They've written so many, whether it's the power of moments and how we manage culture and climate, or their change management in their book Switch. I mean, it's just so many nuggets, and half the time I wonder if I have an original thought, but that we simply synthesize the body. And I think that's what life experience gives you.
Yeah. Right. Jim and I have had the conversation before when we're looking at leaders and who's hitting the mark and growing and those things. And there was a time where we had a conversation. If we just separated our groups right now between the learners and the non-learners, it becomes pretty evident who's being successful within our systems.
Yep,
uh,
absolutely.
well, let's talk a little bit about mentors and coaches and advisors, and now you're I mean, you've risen to the level now of you're more of the coach and the advisor. But you've had mentors, I'm sure, and you know that relationship of both. And so let's talk about that relationship. What makes a person safe as a sounding board, as a mentor, as somebody that you reach out to? And as leaders think about mentoring and coaching others, what are some things they need to think about to be a valued mentor, not just somebody that gives advice?
hmm Well, I think one, you said something about me having risen to whatever. I think we've never arrived,
Mm.
and I think to your point about being a learner, I mean, we've got so many things to continue to learn and to engage with. And so I think one is just realizing that none of us have it all, and we all have the opportunity to learn from each other. So in a mentee mentor relationship, it's a mutual growth opportunity. It really can be and should be. But to say what fosters that, how do you start that? Without a doubt, it's a relationship. We have to trust each other. We have to respect each other and appreciate the voice of the other person. I mean, nobody ever likes to be told what to do, and so I think it is a mutual respect kind of thing. As we've all grown and learned leadership in a mentor role with the mentee, to sit and tell um, somebody this, that, and the other kind of thing versus engaging in conversation about their experience and then just kind of guiding, if you've had the cognitive coaching training. It's really about supporting them in their thinking and helping them, to quote Chip and Dan Heath, to trip over the truth, to kind of discover the right option through their own experience versus being dictated to. I mean, that's why I used to look back and be really judgy back when I was in grad school as a younger man. I'd like, who are you quoting all those books, and who are you? I mean, just like kind of almost laughing like at them, to be honest with you, thinking there's no way I'll ever be that guy. And and the reality is that it's just through self-discovery and self-exposure and dialogue that it just happens. I mean, I couldn't have set out on a path to put all of these things in my life experience. And so I think the same is true with the mentor-mentee relationship. It's just really coaching and guiding the journey, not dictating the knowledge. And so I think that's just it. It's just about perspective. We're just kind of a co-laborer a lot of times in that experience, and just have a chance to partner along the way.
It that humility piece for me is I can definitely think of some times where I had everything figured out until I sat in that seat and it didn't. I mean, whether it was principal, it didn't matter. And man, really having to. I try to give a lot more grace and do a lot more listening now than I did at that time with the with the judgmental. So to hear you talk about that, and times we'll run into people and listen to them as well, and you're like, oh, this is going to be a painful learning process for them, but I'll be here to support them. So good stuff.
It's
I'll
kind
go
of
to three.
interesting. Don't want to take us down a weird path for anybody, but certainly as superintendents, we work with boards, and we have 7 different people. Maybe it's another podcast conversation, but you think about that coaching, that guiding, that conversation has to happen with 7 different people who come from varied backgrounds and knowledge and expectations. And you talk about that. That's a challenge. I mean, that was probably um, among the most challenging, because generally speaking, when we're working with people in educational leadership, we have a common bedrock foundation of knowledge, skills, dispositions of what we're talking about. But when we pull those folks in into service in a public school board of education, there's a little bit of a different manner and just starting point. And so anyway, I didn't mean to take that tangent, but that's probably another conversation for another time. But it's certainly really, because I think the role of the superintendent is to lead, guide, and kind of help direct, but it's through a collaborative partnership, all while you're not directing. I mean, they're your bosses. And so it's really the epitome of needing to have that humility, Nathan, to kind of guide and kind of help them kind of trip over the truth again, to use that phrase.
I think it's good to talk about. I mean, so for both of you, I'll kind of step back on this one because I mean I'm a superintendent of a very small school district. This is year one, but for you guys specifically, and I watched Jim over the years, you're in this unique position and building the communication and the culture and and just collaborating with everyone where if something goes wrong, everyone below you has sometimes the desire and the ability to point the finger at you and blame you. And boards can kind of that same piece. So you're like in this weird middle section. And so I've kind of tossed that back because I'm certain that there are folks listening that either need to understand um, that more or need some advice on it. So
Well, I mean, I'll just jump in with the fact that when I teach board relations, and it's been a long time since I've taught that class, trying to give them the perspective of, yes, they're your bosses, but it's not like they're bosses in like an industrial setting where they have come up through the ranks and now they're your boss and they have all of this life experience that they're leaning on. They are your bosses but they do not, most of the time, they do not have an education background. So you set in that interesting place of being um, definitely have to be in tune with their representation of your community. So for the values and the expectations and what's important, all of those things, you've got to lean on them. But when it comes to educational decision making, you've got to be their mentor, their coach, their and it's a tricky place to be, especially when those two things don't necessarily align. So all of a sudden you've got an issue. And I think back to COVID. COVID was a very challenging spot for a superintendent because you had board members who were hearing all of these things from a community perspective, and you were trying to balance those with educating kids. And they collided a lot. And nothing was the wrong answer. They were just different answers. And it really had to that I think of that as that place where we were really in the middle. But you can get into that situation in a number of areas. And you have to remember they're your boss because you want to continue to be able to lead that district. But you also have to understand that if you're going to lead and bring those students and culture and staff to the place you want them, you're going to have to train the board and coach the board on what that looks like. They've what you sat there in the middle.
Yeah, I would just echo everything you just said, Jim. It's we as superintendents have the need to guide and lead the ship, and hopefully you have a good team from an instructional leadership and a professional learning, from an academic, pedagogical perspective. You've got to have that expertise. We have to have the finance understanding, the all the work with tight times and the education to understand not only state, local, but federal funding and then how to actually function a budget. I'm saying all the things that any superintendent knows. So there's all those technical pieces, but then it really does boil down to a partnership with the board president and the capacity to lead. I mean, because it's the same principle that we talked about earlier, that everybody has a role, everyone has a strength, everyone has a capacity, and that board member who has a MBA is probably going to gravitate toward the finance stuff. The board member who is a former teacher is naturally going to want to gravitate toward the instructional piece. And it's really interesting to try to, again, leverage that, celebrate that, but then also, as you think about that functional board training, is help them to understand that they're at the strategic level, not at the operational level. And so then there's that fine line of coaching, not too different from managing. If I had a superintendent that I was mentoring and they were in the weeds, in a bigger district from a standpoint of I've got a team, and if they're in the weeds and they are telling that director or executive director or assistant soup how to do everything, then that's going to be the same level of dysfunction as a board or board member who does the same. It's just leadership, and it's understanding how to empower people in the right way, but then I'll help everyone understand their roles, and that is not easy. It really is. It can be a big challenge, especially like you said, Jim. They're your bosses as a collective unit. You hope you have trust. You hope you have their respect. Back to the mentoring. If you don't have trust and respect, then it's very hard to mentor and to guide and coach. And so it really is so important to foster those relationships and build that trust. And so I know we have superintendents who will listen to this who are struggling with that in different ways or shapes or form. But it really does boil down to how do you find some common ground where there's a trusting relationship to operate on, and then again looking at it like we have 7 individual leaders with strengths that need to be empowered, and then those roles need to be defined. And so important, but so much easier to talk about than to do. when it's difficult. I mean, when it's easy, smooth sailing, it's easy peasy. But when it's not, it's a tricky thing.
Well, you talked about somebody that you're mentoring, and one of the things we believe strongly at Lyft is leaders need space to think out loud with someone who understands the work, but is not necessarily caught up in the daily noise. And so that's outside perspective, which is a little bit, that's kind of what we do. But so as you think about that, what outside perspectives have you used during your journey, and how did you lean into those?
Sure. So I'm talking really to and about superintendents in that lane in particular, but it would be true for principals or otherwise. But associations are critical. I mean, I think that if an individual thinks they can lead in their district effectively and stay in the box of their district and not be engaged, sometimes I've heard people, I just don't have time to go. I can't go to MASA. I can't go to Southwest Mass. I don't have time to go to the leadership forum here or there. I would argue we can't afford not to, because it's really those relationships for people who are not in your current box, who you can just talk to. Jim, I've talked to you and just bend your ear just to reflect on difficult things before. And, you know, we do that. And I've had other people visit with me about things. And so I think it's really important to realize that there's 518 school districts and about 518 different kinds of scenarios that we deal with. And we have to, but the odds are that somebody you interact with has been in your exact same spot. And so, from a health standpoint, from an emotional wellness, from a just a taking care of yourself and your well-being standpoint, we have to do so many things, and part of that includes having those times where you can really sit down with people who are living the same life that you're living or who have lived it, and you can just kind of let your hair down and talk and reflect and maybe even, I mean, I try not to commiserate, but sometimes you commiserate, and it's a little bit cleansing to do that. I think it's always important to come back to the core of why we do what we do. And I think COVID, you mentioned it, Jim, that COVID was a time. I sat on Zooms at that point in time, and with men and women who cried, who had kind of not breakdown, but just were broken down, and whose mental, emotional, physical, these are well-being. It was among the most stressful experiences I've ever gone through as an educator. And sometimes people left the profession. And if we don't do things like what you're doing and providing resources through Lifted or just really coaching and guiding people, we have to take care of ourselves. We have to be engaged, and sometimes that means be vulnerable with people that we care about and reflect and respect. So yeah, it's I would say just being involved outside of your system so that you can have people who can kind of support you.
Or just one quick thing for those out there that are listening that fall in that category, like Dave mentioned, of I don't have time, I can't be away from the district. That was me, and
Hmm.
I reflect on that a lot now that I'm not there. But hearing the stories of my peers and colleagues that were they went to as many things as they could. They got involved with the state association. They did those things. Just the connections they made, the things they learned from the people. Now, I tried to go to the commissioners conference and to the massa meeting. I tried to go to some meetings, but early in my career, small district, I found it easy to say, I need to stay here and focus on my district. They don't need to be spending money for me to be gone. And I think what I learned as I went through it is, man, I missed opportunities to build relationships and get that outside support because I just tried to stay there and be the Lone Ranger. And that's I don't I don't recommend that for anybody.
Jim, I think when we do those things, and when I was a high school principal, that was me. I was working, and I mean, I don't even want to say the number of hours I worked because I'd be embarrassed to admit to it. And I had 4 kids at home, and you think that what you're doing is you're the only one living that life. And I think we realized that there's a lot of parallel universes out there, and we can do our job better when we collaborate and support each other. So I agree with you. It's so important.
I so every once in a while, and I send them to Jim, and I mean, if you've listened to these podcasts or much of what we have, that you understand the element of faith, and it's important to us. And so if you're interested, I can send that to anybody. But uh, I wrote one the other day, and really it's about just leaning into this lie of isolation, um, and the emotions that Jesus had gone through. And even, he came in human form and he had all these pieces in the sorrow. When he went to the Garden of Gethsemane, he still brought people with him and understanding. Or when um, the mat carriers came and lowered the man through the roof so he could see, like understanding your mat carriers, understanding like you shouldn't, and if you find yourself in a place of isolation, it's probably not a healthy place. And understanding like bringing those peers, whether it's in your organization or outside your organization, those like-minded people along with you to celebrate and work in the good times, and inevitably in those harder times to understand that they're right there with you too. And so I think just, man, leaning into that piece, and you find yourself like you can always be distracted with something else to do.
Mhm.
It just absolutely.
So let me go now to the developing other leaders. Let's talk a little bit about what is the process in your district, intentionality of building up, like building principals, building up your assistant superintendents. What does Lebanon and Dr. Schmitz do to intentionally pour into their development?
Sure. Well, I think for one, it's a priority. I mean, and I don't know where my mindset was established in this, but I sometimes liken it to my time serving in the military. Um, every single soldier, I was in the Army, was all you're always being taught that you're getting ready for your next promotion, your next position. And leadership was always looking to the person below them to train them up and equip them. So my mindset, I just assume that's just the way life is. And so I've always sought to expose when I was a lead, to expose my assistants to everything I'm doing so they can learn and grow. And now, I would tell my assistant superintendents that any of them can be superintendents when they're ready to, because they've seen everything. I don't operate in silos. And so part of it is just giving people opportunity to be exposed to things outside their quote unquote lane, and so they can have a broad base. But one of the really specific things that we do here, and I talk to every leader about it, is through our strategic planning. And I got this from Norm Ritter. Norm Ritter was my superintendent in Springfield, and he told me, he says, if you want to get something done. I was a principal at Kickapoo High School at the time, and he was sitting with me, and he said, if you want something to get done, if you really want to make it happen, find a champion for it and give it to them, and back to that equip and empower and get out of the way. So that's how I interpreted that. And so we make champions. Well, in our strategic planning, because we need to move the needle. And I am so thankful for the team that I've had to work with in Lebanon. And I've been here long enough to really get to see fundamental transformation that's happened. And we're on the second of a 5-year strategic plans, and I've gotten to see things we talked about 10 years ago, now normal business that didn't happen, that weren't who we were before. And that only happened by this, a very strategic approach to clearly identifying, what we have 13 strategies, for example, in among our 6 goals. And each of those strategies, we've kind of like, sort of like the atomic habits, step by step by step, we're going to eat that elephant one bite at a time, but at some point we're going to get her done. And so, but the leadership development piece is Mrs. Jones and Dr. Smith, this is yours. This strategy is yours. You get the team in the district. You lead this dialogue, and you come annually and present to me where we are in progress with our scorecards. You present to the board. And when you are interviewing for my job someday or for that next job, you can communicate, hey, I've taken something from the ground up to concept to a gap that was needing to be filled from the district. And you'll be able to say, I led this strategic effort and now XYZ exists. And so in that future interview, they now can talk, as opposed to the theoretical, they can talk about a literal impact that they've had on our organization. And so we talk about that a lot, and it's really just through actual experiential impact. So that's one way we invest. Just in recent years, I've really struggled from a time coordination standpoint, but one of the learning pieces that has been most foundational for us as a learning organization, and we try to be intentional to be a learning organization, is our book studies. Many of the books I referenced earlier were something that my executive leadership team, we did a book study on, and my team has then taken those various books, and we've led small groups with leaders. So one of my assistants might have led Shifting the Monkey or Grit or one of the Heath Brothers books. And so kind of a dividing. And I look at it sort of like an organizational or institutional knowledge, institutional vocabulary. When I talk about shifting the monkey or when I talk about shaping the path, those are all references to concepts that were a part of these books that begin to create the DNA of our paradigm. And so from an organizational identity, but again, that takes time. It takes time and persistence. And from a leadership standpoint, you can't do that in 1 year or 2 years. It takes time and persistence and really just a lot of persistence, I suppose. But those are just a few things that we do to really invest in our leaders and make sure that they're growing and being stretched.
Dave, I wonder if I'm going to guess you're intentional about it, as I can definitely hear those pieces. We've got the superintendents on here or higher level leadership on here, and then we've got some that are underneath somebody. You're saying, well, yeah, I'd love to do that, but my boss won't let me, or vice versa. And so creating those conditions where, like, hey, when you give somebody some autonomy to do some of these things, like inevitably they're gonna mess it up, and your reaction really tells back if, like, moving from micromanager to that coach, that shared leadership model, and some wisdom you might have for that leader, if that makes sense.
If just to help them with their micromanagement piece of it.
Yeah, what are the conditions that kind of lead to that? Because again, you're like, oh, well, I'm going to give it control and I'm going to give it to somebody and they're probably going to mess it up.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a great, my entire dissertation, which, when you do that work, you're like immersed in it, was all around personalization, student discovery. Is really about what we call now real world learning, and just did a deep dive in studying about how we help kids explore and discover and pursue their passions and interests in authentic ways, how we engage community partners, which we talked about last time, and how we create this environment where kids graduate with a plan for their future, right? So that is a passion of mine. Well, our second goal of our strategic plan is that all kids will explore, discover, and pursue their passions and interests. It's a goal. I got to be a part of influencing that through conversations and dialogue. But yeah, Nathan, it is an interesting thing, um, because I'm not a champion on that. I'm not leading those strategies. I'm not there. I have to let it get developed, by the people who are champions. But as a leader, you get to influence, and it's back to the mentoring. Did I tell the mentee the right solution and how to go? No, just through conversation and dialogue, through reading the right material, and then they discover, and so it's through influence, leadership influence, and dialogue, and mentoring conversations. And my greatest celebration, I my team laughs at me because I've kind of codified this. I think I think when we have something that we value, we talk about it, and we talk about it, or we teach about it, and we say it, and then when we hear people say it,
Mm.
and they say it, and then there's a transition that happens when they say it, they begin to believe it, and when they believe it, what comes after that is expectation. So the coaching, mentoring, relating standpoint is, if our organization believes that all kids should graduate with a clear plan for their future, or that they should all explore, discover, and pursue their passions and interests, we have to talk about it. We have to talk about what that looks like. We have to really emphasize it. We have to say it, and then people start to repeat it, and then they believe it, and they're writing those action plans. They're writing those, and so my level of confidence, if I provide as a leader clarity around the vision, they're gonna craft it out, because they've heard it, they're saying it. So I know my litmus test is when I hear people speaking, and I'm like, I couldn't have said that better myself. uh, and just being okay with it being framed differently than I might have done it, and that's what makes it better. I can remember. I'll give a shout out to Lynn Coffey, Dr. Lynn Coffey. He's out of Bolivar. He was a teacher at Kickapoo High School, and he was the guy who I asked to be the champion for Kickapoo University. I don't know if you've ever heard of it, but Kickapoo University was the manifestation of what I just described at that school. It was a manifestation of, we had kids in a really high achieving high school who were floundering their senior year, had no sense of direction or identity, and were going off to college without a clue about what they were going to do. And we just, okay, so we're helping them do math, reading, writing, and math really well, but they have no personal identity. And so I applied the champion perspective, and Lynn Coffey was the guy. We talked about it so much, and he got the vision, and he was speaking the lingo. He built Kickapoo University, and it became this, and it's still there. If you go to Kickapoo, you'll see those things more than a decade later. And Lynn was the champion. Lynn executed it, and I'm confident Lynn fully believes those things. And it really is. It did not look like I would have built it. It looked better, and that's a celebration.
Good stuff all the way
Yeah,
around. Everything.
thank you.
Yeah, and I think the caution, because that is what can happen when you turn things loose and you support and you help with the vision. The opposite can happen if you turn things loose and then you just hammer somebody that doesn't get it right, because that, I think, then they shut down and they quit trying, and so the to get that result that Mr. Coffee created for you, to get the things that Dr. Manley created at Neosho, you couldn't just turn it loose and then try to be involved in it, or shut down every, and so I think that's the caution on the other side is be careful about how you correct along the way, because
Mhm.
you don't want to shut it down.
Yep.
Yeah, you're a shepherd, right? Your job's to take care. Your job's to serve, to protect, But because you're taking them somewhere, if there's a danger, sure, that's different. But otherwise, like, let's lead and move them to where we need to go.
I think Nathan, it's clarity. I mean, Jim, what you're talking about, if I have provided clarity around the desired, back to the Chip and Dan Heath books, switch. They call it a destination postcard. If I have provided a great deal of clarity about the end state, I want kids to explore, I want them to discover, and I want them to pursue. I want partnerships for authentic experiences. How you frame that, let's just make it happen. And as long as there's clarity around the destination, connecting the dots, leading that way. And I think it comes back to maturity as a leader,
Yeah.
because I would do it differently, and I have done it differently, but done is the key. And if I was the one having to do it, there's no way I could have the capacity. So we have to be humble enough to really empower and equip. Back to the whole opening piece, equip and empower people in their strengths and in their passions and get out of the way.
It's good. Well, should we wrap it up, Jim?
Yeah, and let's let Dave, because we I don't want to get away from our mission, which is wrapping out or leaving the day with how do we take care of ourselves? What are you doing these days to take care of yourself mentally, physically? Because we got every leader's got to take care of themselves.
Absolutely. I'm thankful that I have an amazing wife. My wife Amy she is a small, I would say maybe meek person. She does not need attention, but she is like a massive rock. I know that she prays for me daily. Um, Spiritually, in difficult times, there's no way. My struggles are greater when I'm not connecting and making sure that I'm spiritually connected where I need to be. So that's a critical piece. My headspace gets really bad when I don't plug in. And then just physical fitness, for me, it's helps my day start much better. So I've never, we'll take medicine, we'll take things for various ailments, but I think the emotional support, the spiritual support, and the physical activity are monumental to help us be able to traverse the challenges of our job. And I've never understood it more than I do now.
Yeah. No, we appreciate having you again. Know that we're winding down the year and busy time for you, but always just appreciate your reflections on leadership and getting to explore a little bit more about relationships and developing people today has been good. And just again, appreciate you and what you're doing.
Well, I appreciate what you guys are doing to help leaders. So thanks again for considering me worthy of being on your show.
Awesome. To our listeners, we hope today's conversation encourages you to reflect on what's sharpening you, supporting you, and helping you sustain your leadership journey. If your district is interested in sustained leadership coaching, systems work, or professional development, Nathan and I would be happy to visit with you about how Lifted can partner in that work. Until next time, be well and keep leading with purpose beyond the bell.